The American dream had brought the Park family 6,000 miles from Seoul to Maple Street, carrying nothing but hope and 2 suitcases. Mr. Park had given up his prestigious engineering position, Mrs. Park had left her family behind, and little Jenny had said goodbye to her grandmother's gentle hands, all for the promise of a better life in the land of the free. But within 48 hours of moving in, they discovered that freedom had boundaries they never knew existed. Invisible lines drawn by fear, prejudice, and the dangerous word different. Their new neighbors didn't see a family seeking the American dream. They saw a threat to their comfortable, familiar world. When Jenny Park returned from her first attempt at making friends with tears in her eyes and cookies still in her bag, she asked her mother a question that would echo through Bruce Lee's heart. "Mama, are we the wrong kind of American?" That question reached Bruce Lee through the thin walls of suburban houses, and it awakened something powerful within him. He had spent years teaching that martial arts knew no nationality, that strength had no color, that wisdom had no passport. Now it was time to teach his neighbors the most important lesson of all. What would Bruce Lee do when faced with a community that had forgotten that humanity has no borders? And how would one martial arts master prove that the truest American value isn't keeping people out? It's bringing people together. It was October 15, 1973, and Maple Street had been the picture-perfect American suburb for over 2 decades. Tree-lined sidewalks where children rode their bicycles safely, white picket fences that separated well-maintained lawns, and neighbors who knew not just each other's names, but their children's birthdays, their favorite recipes, and their weekend routines. The Johnsons lived at number 43, where Margaret tended her prize-winning roses and Bob coached Little League on weekends. The Williamses at 45 had 3 teenagers who mowed lawns for pocket money and played basketball in their driveway until sunset. At 49, elderly Mrs. Henderson kept the neighborhood watch, knowing exactly who belonged and who didn't, waving from her window at the mailman and grocery delivery trucks. This was the America that David and Susan Park had dreamed of when they made the impossible decision to leave everything behind in Seoul. David had been a successful structural engineer, designing bridges and office buildings that still stood proud in the Korean capital. Susan had taught elementary school and was beloved by hundreds of children who called her teacher mom. But they wanted something different for their daughter Jenny. They wanted her to grow up without the weight of a divided country, without the constant reminder of war's aftermath, without the limitations that seemed to press down on their generation. America represented possibility, freedom, and most importantly, acceptance. In America, David had told 8-year-old Jenny, as they packed their belongings, "People are judged by their character, not their appearance. You can be anything you want to be." Jenny had spent months preparing for this new life. She practiced English phrases with American pronunciation, learned popular songs that American children sang, and studied pictures of suburban neighborhoods in magazines her parents brought home. She even learned to make chocolate chip cookies from a recipe her mother found in an American cookbook, planning to share them with her new friends. The moving truck arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in October. Jenny pressed her face against the car window as they drove down Maple Street for the first time as residents, not visitors. The houses looked exactly like the pictures in the magazines, beautiful, welcoming, perfect. "Look, Mama," Jenny pointed excitedly at children playing in a yard. "I'm going to play with them." Susan Park smiled, but something in her chest felt tight. She had noticed the way conversations stopped when they had visited the house during their initial tour. The real estate agent had seemed nervous, rushing them through the neighborhood introduction. But surely, she told herself, once people got to know them, everything would be fine. The first sign that something was wrong came within hours of their arrival. As David and Susan unpacked boxes on their front lawn, Jenny noticed 3 children about her age playing hopscotch on the sidewalk just 2 houses down. These were exactly the friends she had been dreaming about for months. She grabbed the bag of chocolate chip cookies she had made and walked toward them with a bright smile. "Hi," Jenny called out in her carefully practiced English. "I'm Jenny. I just moved here. Would you like some cookies?" The children stopped playing and stared at her. One of them, a blonde girl about Jenny's age, looked confused. The others stepped back slightly. The blonde girl said, glancing toward her house, "I don't know." Before any of the children could respond further, a woman appeared from the nearby house. It was Margaret Johnson, the rose garden enthusiast, but her usual friendly demeanor was nowhere to be seen. "Emma," she called sharply to the blonde girl, "come inside right now. It's time for lunch." "But Mom, we just started playing, and this girl has now." "Emma." Margaret's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The other children, sensing the adult tension, quickly scattered to their own homes. Jenny stood alone on the sidewalk, still holding the bag of cookies, watching as doors closed and curtains were drawn. She walked slowly back to her house, where her parents were still unpacking. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Susan asked in Korean, noticing Jenny's confused expression. "They had to go eat lunch," Jenny replied. But even at 8 years old, she sensed there was more to the story. Over the next day, the pattern became unmistakable. When Jenny tried to join children playing in the neighborhood park, their parents would quickly call them away. When she waved at kids walking to the school bus stop, they would look away or be ushered in the opposite direction by adults. The adult interactions were even more telling. When David tried to introduce himself to Bob Johnson while both were getting their morning newspapers, Bob gave a curt nod and quickly went back inside. When Susan attempted to say hello to Mrs. Williams at the grocery store, she received only a cold stare in return. The whispers started immediately. Jenny couldn't understand all the words, but she caught fragments as she played alone in her front yard. Property values. Different kind of people. What's next? It was Mrs. Henderson from number 49 who made the first direct statement. She approached Susan while she was watering the small flower garden she had started. "Mrs. Park," she said, her voice polite but cold, "I hope you understand that this is a very established neighborhood. We have certain standards here, ways of doing things." Susan, whose English was excellent, understood perfectly. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. We simply want to be good neighbors." "Well," Mrs. Henderson pursed her lips, "good neighbors understand when they fit in." That evening, Jenny asked the question that would change everything. "Mama, are we the wrong kind of American?" The words hit Susan like a physical blow. How do you explain prejudice to an 8-year-old who had believed so completely in the American promise of acceptance? "Oh, sweetheart." Susan knelt down and pulled Jenny close. "You are exactly the right kind of American. You are brave and kind and smart, and you belong here just as much as anyone else." But even as she said the words, Susan wondered if she was telling her daughter a lie. Unknown to the Park family, their conversation was overheard by someone who had been quietly observing the situation unfold. Bruce Lee lived at 52 Maple Street, just 3 houses down from the Parks. He had moved to the neighborhood 6 months earlier, and while he had faced some initial curiosity about having a martial arts instructor as a neighbor, his quiet demeanor and respectful nature had quickly won over most of the residents. Bruce Lee had been taking his evening walk when he heard Jenny's heartbreaking question through the park's open window. The words stopped him in his tracks. As someone who had immigrated to America from Hong Kong, Bruce Lee understood exactly what the Park family was experiencing. He had faced the same suspicious stares, the same whispered conversations, the same subtle exclusions. He had learned to navigate the complex waters of being Asian in America, but it had not been without its challenges and painful moments. More than that, Bruce Lee's entire philosophy was built on the principle that artificial barriers between people were not only wrong but ultimately destructive to everyone involved. In martial arts, he had spent years breaking down the traditional boundaries between different fighting styles, creating Jeet Kune Do as a way of absorbing what was useful regardless of its origin. He believed the same principle applied to human relationships. Strength came from diversity, wisdom came from different perspectives, and communities thrived when they embraced rather than excluded. But Bruce Lee also understood that changing minds and hearts required more than just good intentions. It required strategy, patience, and the right approach at the right moment. The next morning, Bruce Lee made his first move. He knocked on the Park family's door just as David was leaving for his new job at a Los Angeles engineering firm. Susan answered, surprised to see their neighbor. Mrs. Park, Bruce Lee said with a respectful bow. I am Bruce Lee. I live at number 52. I wanted to welcome you to our neighborhood properly. Susan's face lit up with the first genuine smile she had received from a neighbor. Mr. Lee, thank you so much. Please come in. I cannot stay long, Bruce Lee replied, but I wanted you to know that I understand what you are experiencing. When I first moved to America from Hong Kong, I faced similar adjustments. Susan's eyes filled with tears. Finally, someone who understood. It is particularly difficult for the children. Bruce Lee continued, glancing toward Jenny, who was eating breakfast at the kitchen table. They do not understand why friendship should have boundaries. Jenny keeps asking what she did wrong. Susan said quietly, how do I explain that she did nothing wrong, but that some people see wrong where none exists? Bruce Lee considered this carefully. Mrs. Park, may I share something with you? In martial arts, we have a principle. You cannot defeat an opponent by attacking their strength. You must find their weakness, but in this situation, the weakness is not something to exploit. It is something to heal. I don't understand, Susan said. Fear, Bruce Lee explained. Fear is what drives people to reject what they don't understand. But fear dissolves when it is replaced with familiarity, with understanding, with recognition of common humanity. He paused, watching Jenny pour syrup on her pancakes with the intense concentration only children possessed. Your neighbors are not evil people, Bruce Lee continued. They are afraid people. They have created a world where everything feels safe and predictable, and change threatens that feeling of safety. But if we can show them that you represent not a threat to their world, but an enhancement of it. Susan looked hopeful for the first time in days. What do you suggest? Patience, Bruce Lee said, and strategy, and perhaps some assistance from someone who has already earned their trust. That afternoon, Bruce Lee began implementing his plan. His first stop was Margaret Johnson's house. Margaret was tending her rose garden, as she did every afternoon. She looked up suspiciously as Bruce Lee approached. Good afternoon, Mrs. Johnson, Bruce Lee said pleasantly. Your roses are magnificent. In Chinese culture, we believe that gardens reflect the gardener's heart. Your heart must be very beautiful. Margaret softened slightly at the compliment, though she remained guarded. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I've been working on this garden for 15 years. It shows, Bruce Lee replied. Such dedication and care. I was wondering, do you happen to know anything about soil composition? I am trying to start a small garden myself, but I am not familiar with the conditions here in Southern California. This was exactly the right approach. Margaret Johnson took immense pride in her gardening knowledge, and despite her reservations about the new neighbors, she couldn't resist sharing her expertise. For the next 20 minutes, Margaret explained soil types, fertilization schedules, and pruning techniques. Bruce Lee listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in her advice. As their conversation wound down, Bruce Lee said casually, I noticed the new family has started a small flower bed. Mrs. Park seems to be struggling with the clay soil near their front steps. Margaret glanced toward the Park house, her expression conflicted. I suppose, she said slowly, clay soil can be very difficult if you don't know how to work with it. Indeed, Bruce Lee agreed. Perhaps someone with your expertise could offer some guidance. I am sure she would be very grateful for advice from such an experienced gardener. He left the suggestion hanging in the air and moved on to his next stop. At the Williams house, Bruce Lee found Mr. Williams in his garage, working on a car engine. This required a different approach.
Excuse me, Mr. Williams,
Bruce Lee said. I hope I'm not interrupting. I heard you are quite good with mechanical repairs. Bob Williams looked up, wiping his hands on a rag.
I do all right. What can I help you with?
My motorcycle has been making an unusual sound, Bruce Lee explained. I was wondering if you might be willing to take a listen. I would be happy to pay for your time. Bob Williams was a good man at heart, but he was also a product of his time and place. His discomfort with the Park family came not from malice, but from unfamiliarity and the unconscious biases he had absorbed from his community. However, he was also proud of his mechanical skills and always willing to help a neighbor with car trouble. "Bring it over," Bob said. "Let's take a look." Bruce Lee wheeled his motorcycle into the Williams garage, where Bob quickly diagnosed and fixed a loose belt. "No charge," Bob said, genuinely pleased to have solved the problem quickly. "Just glad to help a neighbor." "I am very grateful," Bruce Lee replied. "You know, Mr. Park mentioned that he is an engineer. He worked on some very complex projects in Korea. Bridges, high-rise buildings. I wonder if he might be interested in mechanical work as well. Engineers often have good problem-solving minds for this kind of thing." Bob paused in his cleaning up. "He's an engineer, structural engineer," Bruce Lee confirmed. "Very experienced from what I understand. He was telling me about some of the challenges of working with different materials and stress calculations." This planted a seed in Bob's mind. Engineers were respectable professionals, people he could relate to and respect. Over the next several days, Bruce Lee continued his careful campaign. He spoke with Mrs. Henderson about neighborhood security, casually mentioning that Mr. Park had experience with safety protocols in construction projects. He chatted with other neighbors about various topics, always finding ways to weave in positive information about the Park family's background, skills, and good intentions. But his most important conversation was with Emma Johnson, Margaret's 8-year-old daughter. Bruce Lee encountered Emma playing alone in her backyard while her mother was inside preparing dinner. Emma was trying to build a fort out of cardboard boxes, but it kept collapsing. "That looks like a challenging engineering project," Bruce Lee observed over the fence. Emma looked up, frustrated. "I can't make it stay up. Every time I think I've got it, it falls down." "May I offer a suggestion?" Bruce Lee asked. "In martial arts, we learn that stability comes from understanding weight distribution and balance points." Emma was immediately interested. "Really? How does that work?" Bruce Lee spent the next 10 minutes teaching Emma basic principles of structural stability, using her cardboard fort as a practical example. Soon her fort was standing solidly. "Wow," Emma exclaimed. "You're really good at this." "Actually," Bruce Lee said thoughtfully, "I learned some of these principles from an engineer." "Do you know what an engineer does?" Emma shook her head. "Engineers design buildings and bridges. They make sure structures are safe and strong. There is an engineer who just moved to our neighborhood. He probably knows much more about building things than I do." "Really? Who?" "Mr. Park, from the house with the flower garden. He designed very important buildings in Korea before he came here." Emma's eyes widened with interest. "Does he have kids?" "He has a daughter about your age named Jenny. She seems very nice." That evening, Emma asked her mother about engineers, and mentioned that their neighbor Mr. Park was one. Margaret found herself reluctantly impressed. Engineers were educated, professional people. Meanwhile, Bruce Lee was implementing the most crucial part of his strategy, helping the Park family understand how to navigate their new environment. He visited them regularly, offering both practical advice and emotional support. He explained some of the unspoken social rules of American suburban culture, helped David understand workplace dynamics at his new job, and most importantly, encouraged them not to give up on their neighbors. "Change takes time," he told them. "Hearts do not open overnight, but they do open. We must be patient and consistent, showing them through our actions who we truly are." He also spent time with Jenny, teaching her simple martial arts forms that helped build her confidence and sense of inner strength. "Remember," he told her, "other people's fear does not define your worth. You belong here as much as anyone else. But sometimes, it takes time for people to see clearly." The breakthrough came 2 weeks after Bruce Lee began his campaign. Margaret Johnson was struggling to move a heavy bag of soil amendments from her car to her backyard. David Park, arriving home from work, noticed her difficulty and immediately offered to help. "Oh," Margaret said, clearly torn between her need for assistance and her discomfort with accepting help from someone she had been avoiding. "Please," David said with a warm smile, "it would be my pleasure. I know how important your garden is to you." Margaret hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." As David easily lifted the heavy bag and carried it to her backyard, Margaret found herself actually talking with him. "Your English is excellent," she said, somewhat surprised. "Thank you," David replied. "My wife and I studied very hard before coming to America. We wanted to be able to communicate well with our new neighbors." "What kind of work do you do?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer from her conversation with Bruce Lee. "I am a structural engineer," David explained. "I design buildings and bridges. I am currently working on a project for the city of Los Angeles, a new library downtown." Margaret was impressed despite herself. "That sounds like very important work. I love what I do," David said genuinely. "There is something satisfying about creating structures that will serve the community for many years." As David prepared to leave, Margaret found herself saying, "Your flower bed is coming along nicely. If you ever need any advice about gardening in this climate, I would be happy to help." David's face lit up with the first genuinely friendly offer they had received from a neighbor. "That is very generous. My wife Susan loves gardening, but she is still learning about Southern California plants. Perhaps she could stop by sometime," Margaret heard herself saying, and was surprised to realize she meant it. That evening, Margaret mentioned to her husband that their new neighbor seemed like a nice man, very polite and professional. Bob, who had been thinking about his conversation with Bruce Lee about engineering and problem solving, agreed that the Parks seemed like respectable people. The change began slowly but accelerated quickly once it started. Bob Williams invited David to look at the engine project he was working on, curious about an engineer's perspective on mechanical systems. David's insights impressed Bob, and they discovered they shared similar approaches to problem solving. Mrs. Henderson learned that Susan had been an elementary school teacher and was interested in volunteering at the local school. This dramatically shifted Mrs. Henderson's opinion. Teachers were valuable community members, but the most important change came with the children. Emma Johnson, armed with new knowledge about engineering and encouraged by her parents' evolving attitude, finally approached Jenny Park while she was playing alone in her front yard. "Hi," Emma said shyly. "Are you Jenny?" Jenny looked up, surprised but hopeful. "Yes, are you Emma? How did you know my name?" "Mr. Lee told me about you. He said you like to build things." Emma's face brightened. "I love building things. Mr. Lee helped me make a fort that actually stays up. Do you want to see it?" For the first time since moving to Maple Street, Jenny had a friend. Within days, other children began joining them. Jenny's homemade cookies, which had sat untouched for weeks, became a popular after-school snack. Her patient nature and creative ideas for games made her a welcome addition to the neighborhood children's activities. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Within a month, the Park family had gone from being unwelcome outsiders to valued community members. David helped Bob Williams with a complex repair project, combining engineering principles with mechanical skills. Susan started a small tutoring program for neighborhood children who were struggling in school. Jenny became one of the most popular children on the street, known for her fairness in games and her talent for settling disputes. But Bruce Lee's work wasn't finished. He wanted to ensure that the lessons learned from this experience would last, and that the community would be better prepared to welcome future newcomers. He organized what he called a neighborhood appreciation dinner, where each family would share something about their background and traditions. The Parks prepared Korean dishes, the Johnsons shared Margaret's famous pot roast recipe, the Williams family contributed homemade barbecue, and Mrs. Henderson brought her legendary apple pie. During the dinner, held in the local community center, Bruce Lee stood up to address the group. 6 months ago, he began. "I moved to this neighborhood as a stranger. Tonight, I look around and see not strangers, but friends and family. This transformation did not happen by accident. It happened because good people chose to open their hearts instead of closing their doors. He paused, looking around the room at faces that now showed warmth and genuine affection for each other. The Park family brought something precious to our community, not just their skills and talents, but a reminder that America's strength has always come from its diversity. We are all immigrants or descendants of immigrants. We all came here seeking the same thing: opportunity, safety, and the chance to build better lives for our children. David Park stood up, clearly emotional. When we first arrived, we faced some difficulties. But this community showed us something beautiful: that people can change, that hearts can open, that understanding can overcome fear. Our daughter Jenny now considers Maple Street not just her address but her home. Susan added, "In Korea we have a saying, a tree with strong roots can weather any storm, but a forest of trees can weather any storm together." We have learned that we are stronger as a community when we include all voices, all experiences, all perspectives. Emma Johnson, now Jenny's best friend, stood up with the confidence only children possess. "I want to say something too. Before Jenny came, I thought everyone had to be exactly like me to be my friend. But Jenny taught me that different can be really cool. She knows songs in 2 languages, she makes the best cookies, and she taught me how to play a Korean game that's way more fun than hopscotch." The room filled with laughter and applause. Mrs. Henderson, who had been the most resistant to change, surprised everyone by standing next. "I owe an apology," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "I have lived on this street for 30 years, and I thought I was protecting our community by being suspicious of change. But I realize now that I was actually hurting our community by closing my mind to new possibilities." She looked directly at the Park family. "David, Susan, Jenny, you have made our neighborhood better, not different. Better. I am ashamed that it took me so long to see that, and I am grateful that you were patient with an old woman's foolish fears." Bruce Lee watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped to achieve, not just acceptance of the Park family, but a fundamental shift in how the community approached difference and change. In the months that followed, Maple Street became known as one of the most welcoming neighborhoods in the area. When other new families moved in, a Mexican-American family, an elderly Jewish couple, a young black teacher, they were greeted with curiosity rather than suspicion. With invitations rather than isolation, the children who had learned to play together across cultural lines grew up with a natural understanding of diversity as a strength rather than a threat. Jenny Park and Emma Johnson remained best friends throughout their childhood, and their friendship became a model for the other children in the neighborhood. Bruce Lee's role in this transformation was not widely discussed, but it was deeply felt. Neighbors would often seek his advice on various matters, and he became known as someone who could help people see situations from different perspectives. Years later, when Jenny Park was graduating from high school as valedictorian, she gave a speech that summarized the lessons her community had learned together. "When my family first moved to Maple Street," she said, "we were strangers in a strange land. We looked different, we sounded different, we ate different food, and we celebrated different holidays. Some people saw these differences as threats to the comfortable world they had built." She looked out at the audience, which included not just her classmates but many of the neighbors who had become like family to her. But one person saw our differences as gifts. "Bruce Lee taught our community that diversity is not something to fear, but something to celebrate. He showed our neighbors that getting to know us wouldn't change who they were, it would expand who they could become." Jenny paused, looking directly at Bruce Lee, who was sitting in the front row with tears in his eyes. "Lee taught us that humanity has no borders, that wisdom comes in many languages, and that the truest form of strength is the courage to open your heart to someone who seems different from you." She concluded her speech with words that would echo through the community for years to come. Today, as I prepare to leave for college, I carry with me not just the education I received in classrooms, but the education I received in the heart of a community that learned to see strangers as future friends, differences as potential strengths, and change as an opportunity for growth. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. After the ceremony, Bruce Lee approached the Park family. "I am very proud of you all," he said quietly. "But I am especially proud of this community. They chose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, and growth over stagnation. That choice changed not just your lives, but their lives as well." David Park shook Bruce Lee's hand firmly. "Without your guidance, we might never have found our place here. You showed us how to be patient, how to be strategic, and most importantly, how to maintain hope when hope seemed impossible. You had the hope within you all along." Bruce Lee replied, "I simply helped create the conditions where that hope could flourish. That is what true martial arts is about, not fighting against obstacles, but finding the way to move through them with grace and wisdom." Susan Park hugged Bruce Lee warmly. "You gave us more than a place to live. You gave us a home, a community, and the knowledge that America can still be the land of opportunity for everyone who comes here with good intentions and open hearts." As the years passed, the story of Maple Street became somewhat legendary in the surrounding area. Social workers would refer to it as an example of successful community integration. Teachers used it as a case study in how neighborhoods could proactively welcome diversity. Urban planners cited it as evidence that residential communities could thrive when they embraced rather than excluded newcomers. But for the people who lived through the transformation, it remained a personal story about the power of one person's wisdom and courage to change hearts, one conversation at a time. Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about his role in healing the neighborhood's divisions. When asked, he would simply say, "I did what any neighbor should do. I helped people see that our common humanity is stronger than our surface differences." However, in private moments with close friends, he would reflect on the experience as one of the most important teachings of his life. In martial arts, he would say, "We learned that the greatest victories are won without fighting. The situation on Maple Street taught me that the same principle applies to social change. You cannot force people to abandon their prejudices, but you can create conditions where those prejudices become unnecessary." He would often add, "Fear thrives in darkness, in the unknown, in the space between strangers. But when you bring people together in the light, when you help them discover their shared hopes and values, fear has nowhere to hide." The Park family remained on Maple Street for many years, watching Jenny grow up, graduate from college, and eventually start her own family. When Jenny's children visited their grandparents, they played with the children of Emma Johnson, now Emma Williams, after marrying one of Bob Williams' sons. The neighborhood barbecues still featured Korean dishes alongside traditional American fare. The community garden that Susan Park started included plants from various cultural traditions. The children who grew up on Maple Street went out into the world with an intuitive understanding that diversity enriches rather than threatens community life. And Bruce Lee's house at number 52 became an informal gathering place for anyone facing challenges that required patience, wisdom, and strategic thinking. He never advertised his availability as a counselor or mediator, but word spread quietly that the martial arts instructor on Maple Street had a gift for helping people find solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. The lesson of Maple Street, that humanity truly has no borders, and that communities are strongest when they embrace the full spectrum of human experience, continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the tree-lined streets where it began. In the end, Bruce Lee's greatest martial arts demonstration had nothing to do with physical combat, and everything to do with the gentle but persistent power of understanding to overcome the artificial barriers that people build between each other. The neighborhood that had once closed its doors to strangers became a place where every door was potentially open, where every newcomer was a potential friend, and where the American dream was not a zero-sum competition, but a shared aspiration that grew stronger when more people were invited to pursue it together. And it all began with one person who believed that humanity has no borders, and who had the wisdom and patience to help others discover that truth for themselves.